Now you look as cheap as you really are." My niece sneered, drenching my $5.500 suit in juice. My mother just smirked. They didn't realize 10 seconds later I'd locked the Tesla and cut off their credit cards. But the dark secret I found next that was the real finishing blow. "Now you look as cheap as you really are." The words didn't just ring through the private alcove of the Polo Bar. They seemed to vibrate against the vintage mahogany walls and the brass-framed oil paintings of huntsmen and hounds. My niece, Lexi, stood there with an empty glass in her hand, her chest heaving with a twisted sort of triumph. The sticky, cloying scent of pineapple juice began to fill the air, mingling with the expensive aroma of charred ribeye and old-world leather. I didn't move. I couldn't. I sat frozen as the liquid seeped through the fibers of my $5.500 custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. I could feel the warmth of the juice turning cold against my skin, the pale yellow stain spreading like a bruise across the pristine ivory wool. This wasn't just fabric. This suit was the armor I had earned after 5 years of 80-hour weeks, red-eye flights to Tokyo, and the cutthroat politics of Manhattan's venture capital world. Across the table, the reaction was even more chilling than the act itself. My mother Eleanor didn't gasp. She didn't reach for a napkin to help me. Instead, she let out a small, airy laugh, the kind of sound you'd make at a mildly amusing sitcom. She adjusted her pearls and took a slow sip of her Cabernet. "Oh, Julian," she said, her voice dripping with practiced nonchalance. "Don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke. Lexi is just expressing herself. You know how birthdays bring out the nerves." Beside her, my older sister Cassie was already back on her phone, her thumb scrolling through her feed with a bored flick. "Exactly. Honestly, Julian, you've become so nouveau riche, always showing off with these suits and these restaurants. Maybe you needed to be taken down a peg. It's a family dinner, not a board meeting." I looked around the room. The Polo Bar is one of the hardest reservations to get in New York City. I had pulled every string I had used, every connection I'd built over the last decade just to give them a night of true luxury. I wanted them to see that my success wasn't a weapon used against them, but a bridge I was building for us all. I looked at the table I had meticulously curated. I had ordered the finest cuts for Eleanor, remembered Cassie's specific allergy to shellfish, and even made sure the staff had a non-alcoholic high-end mocktail ready for 17-year-old Lexi. Lexi wasn't finished. She propped her phone up against a silver water pitcher, the front-facing camera catching the light. I realized then that she was recording. She wasn't just insulting me, she was broadcasting my humiliation to her 50,000 followers. "Uncle Julian is finally wearing something that matches his personality," she whispered into the microphone, her eyes gleaming with a malice I hadn't realized a teenager could possess. Dripping in bitterness. Tag a CEO who needs to be humbled. I felt the eyes of the other patrons on me. In a place like this, status is everything. Quiet luxury is the law of the land, and here I was the golden boy of the Vance family, sitting in the middle of a 5-star establishment drenched in fruit juice, being mocked by the very people whose lives I had been subsidizing for half a decade. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint clinking of silverware from the main dining room and the muffled sound of my own heart thudding against my ribs. I looked at Eleanor, hoping for a flicker of maternal instinct, a shred of defense, but she just looked at her watch. "Are we going to order dessert, or are you going to keep pouting?" she asked. "I really want the chocolate lava cake, and your sister has an early yoga class in the morning." That was the moment the ivory wool of my suit felt like it finally caught fire. The sting wasn't just from the juice, it was the realization that I wasn't their family. I was their ATM. I was their safety net. I was the person they called when the rent was due or the car wouldn't start, but I was also the person they resented most for having the very things they felt entitled to. I reached into my pocket and felt my phone. It was dry. I pulled it out, my fingers steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. I didn't say a word. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a drink back. I simply opened my banking app. I saw the auxiliary accounts lined up like soldiers, the cards I had issued to Cassie so she wouldn't have to worry about emergencies, the autopay settings for Eleanor's condo in Boca Raton, and the insurance premium for the Tesla Lexi had driven to her private school that morning. I looked at Lexi, who was still smirking at her phone, waiting for me to react, waiting for more content for her viral video. "You're right, Lexi," I said, my voice coming out low and terrifyingly calm. "I do look cheap tonight. But trust me, by tomorrow morning you're going to find out exactly how expensive my presence in your life really was." I tapped the screen 3 times. Disable, disable, disable. The blue light of the phone reflected in my mother's eyes as her own phone chimed with a notification. Then Cassie's, then Lexi's. 3 simultaneous pings that signaled the end of an era. I stood up, the wet fabric of my suit heavy and cold, and began to walk toward the exit without looking back. My 32nd birthday had officially begun, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one paying the price. The walk back to my penthouse in Hudson Yards was a blur of neon lights and the biting Manhattan wind. Every gust of air turned the sticky pineapple juice into a cold, abrasive crust against my skin. I didn't call an Uber. I wanted to feel the sting. I wanted the humiliation to settle deep into my bones so that I would never, under any circumstances, allow the embers of guilt to reignite. As soon as I stepped inside my apartment, the silence of the marble floors felt like a sanctuary. I bypassed the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River and went straight to the bathroom. I peeled off the $5 500 Tom Ford jacket. It landed on the white tiles with a wet, heavy thud. I looked at myself in the mirror, red-faced hair disheveled, a CEO who looked like he'd been kicked out of a dive bar. I reached for my phone, which had been buzzing incessantly in my pocket. My thumb hovered over the TikTok icon. I didn't have to search for it. Lexi's profile was already at the top of my suggested follows. The video was worse than I imagined. She had used a trending, high-energy diss track as the background music. The camera work was shaky, but deliberate, capturing the exact moment the juice hit my chest, my stunned silence, and my mother's elegant, dismissive smirk in the background. The caption read, "When your high and mighty uncle thinks money buys respect." Spoiler, it doesn't. #humble the rich, #family drama, #CEO. It already had 150,000 views. The comments were a wasteland of strangers cheering her on. Major W for the niece. "He looks so pathetic standing there." "Eat the rich, even the ones in your own family." I felt a hollow ache in my chest, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, sharpening clarity. I scrolled down to the bottom of the comments and saw a notification that made my blood run cold. My sister Cassie had commented with a laughing emoji and a heart. But it was my mother's account, the one I had set up for her on the iPad I had bought her, that had liked every single comment, calling me a narcissist and a fraud. They weren't just taking my money, they were actively trying to incinerate my reputation. In the world of venture capital, your name is your currency. If a video of me being humbled by my own family went truly viral, it wouldn't just be an embarrassment. Nasty rumors about my character would start to circulate among my partners. I sat on the edge of my bed, the city lights blinking like indifferent eyes outside. I opened my banking app again. The disabled status on their cards was still there, but I needed to do more. I looked at the joint identity protection service I provided for the whole family. As I scrolled through the logs, I noticed something that didn't make sense. There were multiple inquiries for a bridge loan, a high-interest, short-term loan typically used to prevent foreclosure. The applicant wasn't Cassie. It was Eleanor, my mother. She had used her middle name and my childhood home address to try and secure a $200,000 loan, but she had listed me as the primary guarantor. She hadn't just stood by while Lexi humiliated me. She was trying to bind me to a massive debt without my knowledge, likely to cover Cassie's spiraling lifestyle or her own secret gambles. My phone rang. It was Eleanor. I let it go to voicemail. 10 seconds later, Cassie called. Then Lexi. The pings started coming in text messages, DMs, emails. The Bank of Julian was officially closed and the panic was setting in. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, pouring a glass of water I knew I wouldn't drink. I opened my laptop and drafted a single email to my private investigator and my estate lawyer. I didn't mention the juice. I didn't mention the birthday. I only mentioned the unauthorized loan application and the immediate repossession of all corporate-titled assets. I thought back to the golden detail, that tiny 18-karat gold button that had snapped off my sleeve when Lexi grabbed my arm. It was sitting on my dresser now, a small, lonely piece of metal. It was the price of my freedom. Tomorrow, they would realize that the cheap uncle they mocked was the only thing keeping the roof over their heads. But tonight, I had a different task. I had to find out exactly how deep my mother's betrayal went, and as I started digging into the shared cloud drive I had never bothered to check, I realized the juice was just the beginning. Deep in a folder labeled House Records, I found a subfolder that shouldn't have been there. It was titled Julian Insurance. Inside weren't insurance policies. They were photos. Dozens of them. Photos of me at dinner with clients, photos of my apartment, even photos of my trash. They hadn't just been using me. They had been stalking me, looking for any dirt they could use to blackmail me if the money ever stopped flowing. The sting of the pineapple juice was gone. In its place was a cold iron resolve. I wasn't just cutting them off. I was going to war. I sat in the dark of my living room, the city's skyline flickering like a failing heartbeat against the glass. On the marble coffee table sat the only gift my family had brought to my birthday dinner, a small, crumpled bag from Marshall's. I reached in and pulled it out, a lemon and sage-scented candle. The glass was dusty, and on the bottom a bright red clearance sticker stared back at me. $9.99. They hadn't even bothered to peel it off. $10. That was the value they placed on the man who had been hemorrhaging money to keep their world from collapsing for 60 consecutive months. I opened my laptop and began a mental audit, a ledger of my own stupidity. I started with Cassie. My older sister had always been a master of the emergency. It started small, a utility bill here, a grocery run there. But then it became the rent. Over 5 years, I had transferred exactly $150,000 into her account, specifically for her living expenses. I had paid for a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she couldn't afford so that Lexi could have a stable environment. I didn't just pay the rent, I paid the security deposits, the broker fees, and the unexpected repair costs that her landlord supposedly demanded. I was the silent co-signer of her entire existence. Then there was the car. Lexi's 16th birthday. My mother had cornered me at Christmas, weeping about how dangerous the subways were becoming and how Lexi was too fragile for the bus. So I did what the good uncle does. I walked into the Tesla showroom and put down $75,000 for a Model X. I didn't just buy it, I insured it, I paid for the premium connectivity, and I covered every single tire rotation and software upgrade. I thought I was buying her safety. In reality, I was just buying her a mobile studio to record videos of my own downfall. As I scrolled through my bank statements, the numbers began to blur into a singular, ugly truth. Between the $150,000 for Cassie's rent, the $60,000 in credit card shopping trips Eleanor had disguised as grocery runs, and the $75,000 car, I had spent nearly $250,000 on people who thought a $10 clearance candle was a fair exchange. I remembered the time Cassie called me at 3:00 a.m. sobbing that her heat had been cut off. I had wired her $4,000 instantly. 2 days later, I saw her on Instagram posting photos from a wellness retreat in Sedona. When I asked her about it, she told me I was controlling and that she needed the trip for her mental health because of the stress of being poor. I looked at the candle again. The scent was cloying and cheap, a mockery of the expensive orchids I had paid to have placed on our table at the Polo Bar. It was a physical manifestation of their contempt. To them, my wealth wasn't something I had built. It was something I had stolen from the family pot, and they were simply reclaiming what was theirs. My financial planner had warned me years ago. "Julian, you're not a brother or a son to them," he had said, looking over my annual gifts. You're a high-yield savings account with no withdrawal limits. I had ignored him because I was haunted by the memory of us growing up in a cramped house where the lights went out every other month. I wanted to be the hero who ensured the lights never went out for them. But as I sat in the glow of my Hudson Yards penthouse, I realized I hadn't saved them. I had only subsidized their cruelty. I picked up the $10 candle and walked it to the trash chute in the hallway. I dropped it in and listened to the muffled thud as it fell 30 floors. It was the last thing I would ever accept from them. I went back inside and opened a new file on my desktop. I didn't title it Family. I titled it The Audit. I began to scan every receipt, every wire transfer confirmation, and every loan agreement I had saved over the years. I wasn't just looking for spending anymore. I was looking for the trail of the unauthorized loan Eleanor had attempted to take out in my name. If they wanted to treat me like a business, it was time I showed them how a business handles a hostile takeover. At 8:00 a.m., the sunlight in my lawyer's midtown office was cold and unforgiving. I sat across from Arthur, a man who had been my fiduciary and legal shield for a decade. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with the weary eyes of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. On the glass desk between us sat a thick manila folder. This was no longer about a ruined suit or a viral video. This was about the $200,000 bridge loan I had glimpsed the night before. "Julian," Arthur said, his voice flat. "It's worse than we thought. This wasn't just a clumsy attempt at a loan. This was a calculated, multi-step identity theft." He slid a document across the table. It was a loan application for a hard money lender, the kind of people who don't care about your soul as long as they can seize your assets. My signature was at the bottom. It looked perfect. The loops of the J, the sharp cross of the N, it was an exact replica of the signature I used on my corporate filings. "She didn't just guess your social security number, Julian," Arthur continued. "She's been using your tax returns from 3 years ago, the ones you kept in the safe at the Boca condo, the condo you pay for." My stomach turned. Eleanor hadn't just stood by while I was humiliated. She had been excavating my life like a grave robber. But the twist came when Arthur flipped to the final page of the dossier. "She wasn't taking the money for herself," he said. "The funds were being diverted to a shell company registered in Delaware. The CEO of that company, your sister Cassie." I leaned back, the leather of the chair creaking in the silent office. "What was the company for?" "A luxury boutique," Arthur replied. "Apparently, Cassie decided she was a fashion mogul 6 months ago. She signed a 5-year commercial lease in the design district of Miami. When the shop failed to move a single unit in 90 days, the creditors came knocking. Eleanor wasn't just trying to help Cassie. She was trying to save her from a lawsuit that would have stripped them both of everything. The weight of the betrayal felt like a physical blow to my chest. They hadn't just asked for help. They had committed a felony to cover up a failure they were too proud to admit to me. By using my name as a guarantor, they had tied my credit score, the very foundation of my venture capital firm, to a sinking ship. If that loan defaulted, which it inevitably would, my ability to raise capital for my next fund would vanish. My career would be over before my 33rd birthday. "Identity theft is a federal offense, Julian," Arthur reminded me, his pen hovering over a formal affidavit. "If you sign this, the bank will halt the loan, but the police will be at your mother's door by noon. If you don't sign it, you are legally responsible for the $200,000 plus interest and the damage to your reputation." I looked out the window at the New York skyline. Below me, millions of people were scurrying to jobs they hated to pay for lives they barely enjoyed. I had fought so hard to be different, to be the one who made it. And yet my own blood had used the very tools of my success to build my gallows. "They think I'm a bank," I whispered. "They think I'm just a pile of money that doesn't feel anything. They think you won't fight back because you're family," Arthur corrected. "They are counting on your guilt. It's their most valuable asset." I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I thought of the smirk on my mother's face as the pineapple juice dripped off my chin. I thought of Lexi's TikTok comments. They wanted a show. They wanted to see the high and mighty Julian humbled. "I'm not signing the affidavit yet," I said, putting the pen down. Arthur frowned. "Julian, you can't be serious." "I'm not letting the police handle this," I said, a cold, predatory light entering my eyes. "Not yet. I want them to come to me. I want them to sit in my home in the middle of the life they think they're entitled to, and I want to watch the moment they realize that the Bank of Julian doesn't just close it forecloses." I stood up and grabbed the folder. "Prepare the repossession orders for the Tesla, and Arthur, call the property manager at the Boca condo. Tell them the locks are being changed at 3:00 p.m. today. If Eleanor wants her things, she can find them on the sidewalk." I walked out of the office, the charcoal gray of my new suit feeling like armor. The first twist was there's the fraud. But the second twist was mine. I wasn't just cutting them off. I was reclaiming my name cent by cent. By 3:00 p.m., my penthouse felt less like a home and more like a courtroom waiting for the jury to arrive. I had cleared the marble kitchen island of everything except a single thick manila folder with the word boundaries typed in bold black ink across the tab. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but the light was sharp and clinical, exposing every fleck of dust in the air. When the knock finally came, it wasn't a request, it was a demand. I opened the door to find the three of them standing there like a disgraced royal family. Eleanor was dressed in a beige trench coat I had bought her last spring, her face set in a mask of wounded dignity. Cassie was behind her eyes, red and puffy, clutching her designer handbag as if it were a shield. Lexi trailed at the back, her face buried in her phone, though her thumbs weren't moving. The silence was brittle. "Julian," Eleanor began, stepping past me without an invitation. "I hope you're proud of yourself. Lexi had to take the bus today. The bus. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is for a girl her age? And Cassie's card was declined at the grocery store. People were staring, Julian. The humiliation was unbearable." I closed the door slowly and turned to face them. The humiliation. That's an interesting word to use, Mother, especially after the TikTok video Lexi posted of me last night. Did you enjoy the 200,000 views? Or was it the like you left on the comment calling me a narcissist that gave you the most satisfaction? Cassie stepped forward, her voice high and trembling with a practiced sort of rage. "It was a joke, Julian. We were frustrated. You sit up here in your ivory tower looking down on us while we struggle to make ends meet. We are your family. You don't just turn off family like a light switch." "I didn't turn you off," I said, walking toward the marble island. "I just stopped paying the subscription fee for your disrespect." I slid the boundaries folder toward them. It fanned out across the marble like a deck of cards. "Let's talk about struggling to make ends meet. Over the last 5 years, I've transferred $150,000 to you, Cassie. That's $30,000 a year just to keep you in an apartment you don't even clean. Eleanor, the Boca condo cost me $4,000 a month in mortgage and HOA fees, not including the $60,000 in credit card charges I've absorbed for your emergencies. That turned out to be luxury spa days and jewelry. You tally our love." Eleanor hissed, her eyes narrowing. "You keep a ledger on your own mother after everything I sacrificed to raise you alone." "I'm not tallying love, Mother. I'm tallying theft," I countered. I flipped to the back of the folder and pulled out the document Arthur had given me that morning, the hard money loan application. I laid it flat on the counter right in front of Eleanor. "This is a federal crime. You forged my signature to secure a $200,000 loan to bail out Cassie's failed boutique. You didn't just ask for money this time. You tried to steal my future." The color drained from Eleanor's face so fast it was as if a plug had been pulled. She reached for the edge of the counter to steady herself. Cassie's eyes darted between the document and her mother, her mouth hanging open in a silent "oh." I was going to pay it back," Eleanor whispered, her voice losing its edge. "I just needed a little time. Cassie was so stressed, Julian. She was going to lose everything. I did it for the family." "No," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. "You did it because you think I'm an infinite resource. You did it because you've spent so long convincing yourselves that my hard work belongs to you, that you've lost the ability to distinguish between a gift and an entitlement. You didn't just hat Nuak Dua tossed juice on a suit last night. You tried to drown me in debt so you could keep playing dress-up in the design district. Cassie suddenly let out a hysterical laugh. So, what you're going to call the police on your own mother? You're going to be the man who put his family on the street for a few $100,000. Think about the PR, Julian. Think about what your partners will say when they find out you're a man who sues his own blood. I looked at Cassie, then at Lexi, who had finally looked up from her phone. Her face wasn't triumphant anymore. She looked terrified, realizing for the first time that the rich uncle wasn't just a character in her content. He was the only thing standing between her and a reality she wasn't prepared for. I've already thought about the PR, I said. And I've thought about the truth. The locks on the Boca condo have been changed. The Tesla is currently being towed to a secondary lot. And as for the loan, I haven't signed the fraud affidavit yet. But if you don't do exactly what I say in the next 10 minutes, I will. Eleanor's hand began to shake. What do you want, Julian? I want the truth, I said, looking directly at Lexi. And I want the secret you've been keeping for them, Lexi. Because I know you didn't hurl that drink just because you were expressing yourself. I know there's more. And if you don't tell me right now, you can find a way to pay for your own college tuition because that fund is gone the moment I walk out this door. The room went deathly silent. Lexi looked at her mother, then at her grandmother. The alliance was fraying. The family they so loudly championed was about to face the one thing they couldn't afford: accountability. Lexi's lower lip trembled, and for the first time the Gen Z bravado evaporated, leaving behind a terrified 17-year-old. She looked at Cassie, who was frantically shaking her head, a silent plea for silence written in her wide, panicked eyes. "Lexi, don't you dare," Cassie hissed, her voice cracking. "Remember who takes care of you." "Julian takes care of me," Lexi screamed back, the outburst echoing off the glass walls. "You just use me. You told me that if I didn't make him look like a villain, he'd never give us the money for the shop. You said he needed to be softened up so he wouldn't ask questions about the loan." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "What are you talking about, Lexi?" Without a word, Lexi pulled a second phone from her pocket, an old, cracked device she usually kept in her gym bag. She tapped a few icons and laid it on the marble counter. The audio was muffled, at first the sound of a car engine idling. Then Eleanor's voice came through, sharp and unmistakable. "He's getting too arrogant, Cassie. He thinks he's the patriarch now just because he has a penthouse. If we don't bring him down a notch at dinner, he's going to look at those books and see the bridge loan. We need him defensive. We need him feeling guilty for being too successful. Lexi, when the sparklers come out, you make your move. Make it a scene. If he reacts poorly, he's the bully. If he takes it, we own him." Then came Cassie's voice, cold and calculating. "And once the video goes viral, he'll be so desperate for us to delete it and forgive him that he'll sign anything we put in front of him. He's always been weak for us. He's a provider, Mom. It's his nature. We just have to remind him of his place." The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at my mother, the woman who had tucked me in, the woman whose medical bills I had paid without a second thought, the woman I had placed in the seat of honor at every dinner I'd ever hosted. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the phone, her face a mask of pale, frozen fury. It was a strategy. Eleanor whispered, her voice devoid of remorse even now. "A mother does what she must to protect her children. You were already wealthy, Julian. You didn't need that $200,000. Cassie did. I was just balancing the scales." "You weren't balancing scales, Mother," I said, and to my surprise, my voice didn't shake. The pain had moved past the point of impact into a strange clinical numbness. "You were harvesting me. You treated my life like a crop you were entitled to burn if it didn't grow fast enough for you." I picked up the manila folder. I felt the weight of the gold button in my pocket, the one that had snapped off my Tom Ford suit. It was a tiny, heavy reminder of the cost of admission to this family. "The deal is this," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "I will pay off the $200,000 loan. Not for you, but to protect my own credit and my firm's reputation. I will not sign the fraud affidavit so you won't go to prison, Eleanor. But that is the final cent you will ever receive from me." "Julian, you can't." Cassie started stepping toward me. "I can," I interrupted. "The Boca condo is being listed for sale tomorrow. You have 48 hours to get your things before the estate liquidators arrive. Cassie, your apartment lease is in my name. I've already notified the landlord that I will not be renewing it next month. You have 30 days to find a life you can actually afford." I turned to Lexi. She was crying quietly now, her phone still clutched in her hand. "The college fund stays," I said. "But it won't be managed by any of you. It's in a locked trust that pays the university directly. If you want to go to school, Lexi, you go. But you do it on your own merit, not as a pawn in your mother's games." "You're heartless," Eleanor spat, standing up and pulling her trench coat tight. "You've let money turn you into a monster. You'll be sitting in this glass box all alone, Julian, and you'll deserve it." "I'd rather be alone in a glass box," I said, walking to the door and holding it open, than be a prisoner in a house built on my own blood. They walked out, Eleanor first head, held high in a delusional shroud of dignity. Cassie next muttering threats about lawsuits she couldn't afford, and Lexi last, her eyes lingering on me for a second as if she wanted to say something before the door clicked shut. I stood in the center of my penthouse. The sun was setting, casting long amber shadows across the marble floors. For 5 years, I had been holding up the world on my shoulders, terrified that if I let go, the people I loved would crushed. I had finally let go, and the only thing that had been crushed was the lie I'd been living. I walked over to the trash can, took the ruined, stained Tom Ford jacket and pushed it deep into the bin. Then I sat down at my table, opened a bottle of wine I didn't have to share, and for the first time in my life I truly enjoyed the silence. 6 months later, spring in Manhattan didn't just feel like a change in weather. It felt like a new life had been meticulously stitched over the ruins of the old one. The Hudson River, which had once looked like a dark moat separating me from a world that only wanted my money, now sparkled under a warm, forgiving sun. I had spent the winter learning to breathe again. I took up boxing in Chelsea, started taking weekend trips to the Catskills just to hear the wind instead of the hum of my own anxiety, and for the first time in a decade I went on a date where I didn't mention my job title once. The penthouse no longer felt like a glass fortress or a cage. It felt like a home. The emptiness that Eleanor predicted would consume me never came. Instead, the silence was filled with the peace of a man who no longer had to look over his shoulder for the next emergency. The first sign of the new world came in April. Lexi asked to meet me at a small, unassuming coffee shop in Soho. She wasn't wearing the designer labels I'd bought her. She was in a simple black polo shirt, part of a uniform for the high-end grocery store where she'd been working 30 hours a week after school. Her face looked softer, the sharp, cynical edge of her social media persona replaced by the weary but grounded look of someone who actually understood the value of an hour. She didn't reach for her phone once. Instead, she slid a small white envelope across the table. Inside was $250, mostly 5s and 10s, some of them wrinkled. "It's not even a fraction of the suit, Uncle Julian," she said, her voice quiet. "And it's definitely not the car. But I wanted you to know that I'm not that girl anymore. Working. Actually working." It made me realize how much you had to give up to give us everything. I was jealous because you made it look easy. I didn't realize you were carrying us all on your back. I didn't take the money. I pushed it back and told her to keep it for her books. But seeing her eyes well up with genuine humility was worth more than any wire transfer. She told me she was heading to a state school in the fall. No ivy-covered walls, no elite prestige, just a solid program she had researched herself. She was doing it for herself, not for the content. A few weeks later, I met Cassie in Central Park. She looked tired. The fashion mogul dreams had been replaced by the reality of managing a retail outlet in a suburban mall. Her credit score was a disaster, a ghost that haunted her every time she tried to apply for a new credit card or a car loan. But, for the first time, she wasn't blaming me. "I used to think you were just lucky," she admitted, watching the rowboats on the lake. "I told myself that you owed us because you got out and we didn't. But the truth is, I stayed behind because it was easier to let you pay for my excuses. I'm living in a studio now, Julian. It's small, the sink leaks, but it's mine. I paid the rent this month with my own paycheck, and I didn't have to lie to anyone to do it." The invitation to Eleanor's birthday arrived in May. There were no reservations at the Polo Bar, no orchids, and no $3 500 menus. It was a backyard barbecue at the small two-bedroom house she had moved into after the Boca condo was sold. I showed up in a $40 t-shirt and jeans. There was no Tom Ford armor, no 18-karat gold buttons to lose. When I walked in, Eleanor was standing by a cheap charcoal grill flipping burgers. She looked older, the mask of high society replaced by something more human. She didn't apologize. Eleanor Vance isn't built for apologies, but when she handed me a plate, she rested her hand on my shoulder for a second longer than usual. "Happy birthday, Julian," she whispered. "The burgers aren't Wagyu, but they're paid for." I realized then that by cutting them off, I hadn't destroyed my family. I'd given them the only thing my money could never buy, a chance to be real. I had stopped being their bank, and in doing so, I had finally allowed them to be my mother, my sister, and my niece. As the sun set over the modest backyard, casting long golden shadows across the grass, I felt a familiar weight in my pocket. I reached in and pulled out that tiny gold button, the one that had snapped off on the night everything changed. I looked at it for a moment, then tossed it into the tall grass near the fence. I didn't need it anymore. I had found something much more valuable than gold. I had found the line where my obligations ended and my life finally began.